As of the end of 2020, Michael Schumacher and Lewis Hamilton both are record-holding 7-time Formula One world champions, which easily puts both in the conversation of who is the greatest F1 driver of all time. For the sake of argument, let's say that it comes down between Schumacher and Hamilton. So who is the GOAT? First, let's look at their career statistics. Lewis Hamilton has more wins, poles, podiums, and points, all done in fewer races, and all are Formula One world records. So looking at the statistics, it's very clear who the best driver is. Right? I think we need to dig a bit deeper to tell the full story. And we're going to start with points. Over the course of Formula One history, the point system has changed a few times. 1991 to 2009, they had two variations of a 10-point scoring system, until 2010 when they changed to a 25-point system. 2019, they added one bonus point for setting the fastest lap if you finished inside the top 10. Thus, the big difference in career points between Lewis and Michael is to be expected and is basically a useless figure to compare. Plus, most will forget that Schumacher's points does not include 1997, as he was disqualified from the season and stripped of all points for his deliberate collision with Jacques Villeneuve in the final race. Adding those points back, and Schumacher's total climbs to 1,566, but it's still an incomparable figure, so let's fix that. If we adjust their points based on the 2010 to 2018 point system, we get a much more comparable figure. Honestly, not a lot of adjustment is required for Hamilton's career. 2007 to 2009 gets recalculated, then the removal of 12 bonus points for fastest laps in 2019 and 2020, and 25 points removed for the double points received in his victory in Abu Dhabi 2014, leaving 4,119. Schumacher, on the other hand, gets all but 3 seasons recalculated, and the points total is a much more comparable 3,886, which includes his points from 1997. But that's still a 233-point difference, and still 40 less races by Hamilton. So what about the number of races in a season? Having a long career in Formula One can really rack up the total races run and other stats like points and podiums. And a long season in a bad car can make a good driver's stat look pretty dismal, but a long season in a great car can make a driver's stats look pretty amazing. So if we take our career totals with the points adjusted to the same point system and calculate all the data based on 21 race seasons, our figures will start to become more aligned. Lewis Hamilton's already incredibly impressive numbers don't increase all that much, as we only added 28 races to his total. This also shows how many of his races resulted in a win, pole, or podium. It is interesting to note that based on these figures, 2020 was statistically his best season. Since most of Schumacher's seasons had only 16 to 17 events, his totals increased quite significantly, adjusted to 116 wins, 91 poles, and over 5,000 points. His career highs being very similar to Hamilton's, and his best season was 2002. But wait a minute. This is assuming he completed 399 races, more than 100 more than Hamilton. Well, that's not fair. And you're right. So there are two ways most will look at this. On the one hand, we can simply take Hamilton's averages and multiply to 399 races, and you get some simply unbelievable numbers. The problem is this assumes Hamilton will race in a car that is a championship contender, if not a dominant car, for the next 5 seasons. On the other hand, we can remove Schumacher's short 1991 rookie season that was split between 2 awful cars, and that seems pretty reasonable. Of course, you can remove his 2010 to 2012 return to Formula One, since, that Schumacher was not the same as the one that retired with Ferrari in 2006. And now these numbers really start to compare with each other. The problem is now we are racing a part of history that did actually happen. So this information, while interesting, is probably not the best to draw our final conclusions on. Plus, no matter how we manipulate the data, there is something that should stand out for each driver. In either case, there is a noticeable time in their careers where they are particularly dominant, and that typically has to do with the equipment that they drive. Now, Formula One has always been about the car you drive. Regardless of how good of a driver you are, you need to have a car capable of winning to win championships. There are some great drivers that don't have remarkable success due to the lack of competitive equipment. On paper, it would suggest that Hamilton has had the better cars throughout his career. But did he really? Many will say his 2007 and 2008 cars were the best on the grid, but that may not be true. Now, no disrespect to Kimi Räikkönen and Felipe Massa, but McLaren had the better driver lineup than Ferrari in 2007, which led to them being slightly faster in qualifying, but Ferrari still seemed to hold a slight edge in race pace, and it was a similar case in 2008. Overall, the Ferrari and McLarens were very closely matched, and it made for some fantastic battles. 2009, his MP424 was a heap of garbage to start the season, and then by some miracle, McLaren was able to find 1 second a lap at the German Grand Prix and transform the car into one that could challenge for poles and wins. The car finished the season faster than the championship-winning Braun GP car. The 2010 MP425 was arguably the second best car and very capable of winning races and contended for both championships, despite being several tenths down on the Red Bull RB6. 2011, the McLaren again was second best, but had no chance against the Red Bulls. 2012 was a competitive season all around, where the McLaren was actually the faster car in qualifying, but couldn't match the race pace of Red Bull or Ferrari. 2013, Hamilton joined Mercedes, who were on the right track of building a fast car. The Mercedes engine was very, very good, and the package was very strong in qualifying, but had nothing for Red Bulls during the race. 2014, well, this was the start of the most dominant era for a single team in Formula One history, and I mean dominant. Now, 2017 and 2018, Ferrari did bring the fight to Mercedes, and Hamilton legitimately had to work for those wins, but despite how close Ferrari got in outright pace, the Mercedes was still the better car, especially as the season progressed, as Mercedes had the better development program. I believe because Mercedes have had such a massive pace advantage that they were able to conserve the car in the race, which is probably why their fastest race laps don't show as strong as their qualifying pace. It's also probably a big part of why they're so reliable. Michael Schumacher was definitely not a stranger to some dominant cars himself. People said the same thing as they do now. If he didn't have the best car, he wouldn't win all the races. And there is some truth to that. One thing is for sure, Schumacher didn't start his career in the best car. In fact, he didn't even have a good car. The 1991 Jordan 191 was by all accounts a turd, but Schumacher made headlines by qualifying the car 7th in his debut race at Spa, even though he didn't even complete a lap in the race. He was quickly moved to Benetton, but it wasn't till a year later at the 1992 Belgian Grand Prix where Schumacher claimed his first victory. The 1992 B192 was not a horrible car. It was just no answer for the famously conquering Williams FW14B. It was pretty much the same story in 1993, where the Benetton was over 1.4 seconds off the pace to the Williams. 1994 and 1995, the Benetton was clearly a dominant car. Wasn't it? Contrary to what many believe, this can be debated. Prior to his tragic accident, the great Ayrton Senna put his Williams FW16 on pole at each of the first 3 races, out-qualifying his teammate Damon Hill by an average of over 9/10 of a second. Williams filled the vacant seat with David Coulthard and former champion Nigel Mansell, but for the most part, Hill remained the faster driver. Had Senna been in the car, the Williams likely would have been several tenths faster. On top of that, in the 2 races Schumacher was banned that season, his teammates couldn't get within 1.2 seconds of the Williams Renault. All of this suggests the 1994 Williams was the faster car. You could argue the 1995 Benetton was the best car. However, the same driver situation carried over from 1994, where Schumacher could get more out of the Benetton than the Williams drivers could get out of their car. 1996, Schumacher joins Ferrari, who are coming out of the dumps and a good half second behind the Williams. Same goes for 1997, yet Michael somehow takes the championship down to the last race of the year. In 1998, the McLaren MP413 with Bridgestone tires was formidable in qualifying, but the Ferrari held their own in the races and again took the championship to the end. Ferrari gave Schumacher a great car in 1999, perhaps even the best car. Unfortunately, Schumacher had a brake failure crash and broke his leg, taking him out for the majority of the season. Ross Brawn has said that he thinks Michael could have easily won the championship that season if it wasn't for his accident. 2000 appears like it could have been a dominating year for Ferrari, which is a bit surprising since the data suggests McLaren and Ferrari were extremely equal in pace, both in qualifying and the race. 2001 was dominant for Ferrari, despite not having a massive pace advantage over their rivals, at least nothing compared to some other cars in F1 history. The F2002, one of the greatest F1 cars of all time, and arguably Schumacher's best season. He finished every race on the podium. In 2003, Ferrari was better than they showed. Schumacher and Barrichello had issues in the first 3 races. The Michelin-shod Williams FW25 was the better car in the hot summer months, but in cooler conditions, the Ferrari was faster. The F2004, absolute destruction. This was the fastest car Ferrari ever had over their rivals, and Schumacher made the most of it. Rule changes in 2005 meant the Ferrari, which had Bridgestone tires, could not compete with Renault or McLaren that wore Michelin tires. At upwards of 8 or 9 tenths slower, the Ferrari was not a challenger. 2006 was a redeeming year, and the 248 F1 appeared to be the faster car, but mistakes were made by team and driver that cost him the championships. 2010, Schumacher came out of retirement to drive for Mercedes in the underdeveloped W01. The 2011 W02 was among the worst cars Schumacher ever drove. The car got better in 2012, even though the results didn't show much success. Now be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see the conclusion of who has had the better cars. Also, don't forget to hit the like button so we can start to talk about teammates. Regardless of how competitive a car is, a driver's first and most important competition is with their teammate. It is fair to say Lewis Hamilton has had the more talented and tougher teammates. To start your career against 2-time defending champion Fernando Alonso is no easy task, let alone beat him. Hamilton had 3 different world champion teammates, and while Heikki Kovalainen didn't have the greatest success in Formula 1, he was still very fast. Schumacher's battle against 3-time world champion Nelson Piquet was too short to draw any accurate conclusions, and while certainly Barrichello and Massa were good drivers, they don't qualify as elite. Even though Hamilton had very high-level teammates, he didn't seem to have much of an issue beating them. The data suggests that Hamilton consistently was the much stronger qualifier, and only on 2 occasions was he beaten in speed. Nico Rosberg in 2014 and Fernando Alonso in 2007, who averaged out to be faster, and taking into account for qualifying fuel loads, may have been the better qualifier as well. Jenson Button managed to put together a better season in 2010, and Rosberg nipped Lewis for the title in 2016. Otherwise, Hamilton always had the better seasons. Schumacher obliterated his teammates into the 2000s. It was Rubens Barrichello that was first to put up any kind of challenge. If you exclude the handful of races against Piquet in 1991, Barrichello was the first teammate to have an average qualifying deficit under half a second. However, Nico Rosberg decimated Schumacher in the Mercedes, though it should be noted that Schumacher's pace really picked up in 2012, showing to be the faster driver that year, at least in qualifying. Now, this is very important. When comparing cars or teammates, it is ideal to use data run in the same conditions. So it must be said that from 2003 to 2009, the qualifying format did not always present identical conditions between drivers and cars. This is especially the case for 2003 to 2005, with different fuel loads, track evolution, and changing weather conditions meant the faster car or the best driver did not always get pole position. Using information that was available, the head-to-head qualifying battle could be theoretically adjusted based on qualifying fuel loads. An example would be the 2004 British Grand Prix, where Barrichello outqualified Schumacher by 4 tenths, but with 6 less laps of fuel on board. If the cars had the same fuel levels, it is likely Schumacher would have had the faster time. Finally, when it comes to teammates, we must address that favoritism does exist in Formula 1. This can be written into contracts where there is a clear number 1 and number 2 driver, or a team may choose to give the better equipment to the driver with the best chances of winning. Now, as technology and quality control continues to evolve, it is safe to say the difference between the 2 Mercedes cars in 2020 is a lot narrower than the Benetton cars in 1992. In 2007, Fernando Alonso publicly stated that Hamilton was getting favored by McLaren, and one former mechanic suggests that this was true for at least the second half of the season. Rubens Barrichello has made similar comments about favoritism at Ferrari, and in some cases the proof is right in our faces. In 2011, the FIA introduced the drag reduction system to help increase overtaking. While it has been rather successful, it doesn't change the result all that much for the top finishers. However, it can certainly be helpful for a faster car starting at the back of the grid due to trouble or a penalty. Well, speaking of which, penalties are much less strict now than they used to be, which is a good thing. We don't want to see penalties ruin races. It used to be common for drivers to receive drive-through or stop-and-go penalties for any sort of altercation, whereas 5-second time penalties added after the race is much more common in 2020. Now, coming back to draw a conclusion on who has had the better cars, we can bring up a quick overview to see each car's success. If we dig a bit deeper, there is some key information that can help determine how good or bad a car actually was. Lap time is the most obvious. A 4/10 advantage or greater typically results in a car that can dominate. Pole positions, often used as a snapshot of the fastest car. Anything over 35% is good. 60% or more pretty much has determined the fastest car over a single lap. 1-2 qualifying positions. This is before any penalties are applied. This shows it's not just about one driver exceeding what the car can do, that the car is capable of being on pole no matter what. 20% would be good, 50% would be exceptional. Wins. A car that wins 35% or more of the races is a car that can be contending for the championship. A car that wins 60% or more of the races has dominated the season. DNFs. To win the race, first you must finish. A car that is reliable and a driver that doesn't get involved in wrecks always gets put in a position to get the best possible result. By today's standards, anything under 10% is very good, while anything over 30% is horrible, by any standard. Team points tell a bigger story than people think. It's a combination of speed, consistency, driver talent, team skill, and mistakes. The races plus minus is how many races it would take the second place team to overtake the Constructors' Champion if they scored maximum points and the champions didn't even show up. So in 2002, Ferrari could have sat at home for 8 races and still won the title, even if their closest rival came first and second for all 8 of those races. Anything under 2 is a decent fight over the season. Anything over 3 is pretty crushing. Looking at the totals combined, Hamilton's cars add up to much greater success than Schumacher's, especially considering it was done in 75 fewer races. But we already knew that, given his individual stats are better as well. While the data clearly suggests Lewis has driven the better cars over his career, there has to be a way to see how valuable the driver has been to their car. Well, if we take their career totals against the total values of the cars, we can see who has provided more for their team's success. And after we broke down all the data, analyzed it thoroughly, it is very clear who the best driver is. I mean, honestly, he did beat them both. In all seriousness, these are just numbers. There's always going to be a subjective element that cannot be measured. All these numbers do suggest that Michael Schumacher is historically the better driver, but it has to be recognized that in sports, athletes get better. And in motorsports, this is no exception. The pool of drivers in modern Formula 1 are on average faster, more consistent, and more physically fit than drivers in the past. The reality is, even if Schumacher sits above Hamilton on the all-time greatest list, a smart team owner would choose Hamilton to drive their car in 2021. So who do you think is the better driver? Leave a comment. Let's hear what you think. Also, if you want to check out the data that I collected to make this video, I will upload it to my Patreon account. You can check out the link in the description. Of course, be sure to like, share, subscribe, and thanks for watching.